You are listening to HOA Violation Vault. My missing package became their favorite weapon. I will make sure the board sees this. Karen yelled that she would ruin my reputation one email at a time. She was standing at my front door waving her phone around like it was a subpoena, and I had been home from work for maybe 10 minutes. I work as a software QA analyst, and the last thing I needed was a meltdown on my porch before I even got my shoes off. This is Stephanie Kessler, the vice president of the Clearbrook Village HOA in Jacksonville, Florida. She showed up because I had sent an email to the board 2 days earlier asking why my neighbor got a warning for his fence stain, but someone 3 houses down had the same issue and got nothing. I kept it polite. I mentioned selective enforcement and asked for clarification on the process. Stephanie took it personally. She was already talking when I opened the door. "I am documenting everything," she said, "and you are going to regret trying to embarrass me in front of the whole board." I told her I just wanted consistency. She cut me off. "Consistency," she said. "You want to talk about consistency. Let me tell you what I am documenting. You stole from the clubhouse storage closet last month, and I have proof." I stared at her. I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her what she thought I stole. She said cleaning supplies and a cordless drill went missing after a weekend workday, and she had a witness who saw me leave with a bag. I told her I was not even there that weekend. She smiled and said, "Go ahead and call whoever you want. I have a committee for that." She was holding that red folder like it was evidence, and she refused to share it. She said the HOA was conducting an internal review, and if I did not cooperate, I would be assessed a $500 fine for obstruction. I asked her what obstruction meant in this context. She said refusing to allow an inspection of my storage unit. I told her I did not have anything in my storage unit except some camping gear and holiday decorations. She said, "Then you will not mind if we look." I did not have time for this. My employer had been watching my attendance because I had a rough stretch in the fall when my car broke down twice, and I was still on probation. One more late arrival, and I was done. I told Stephanie I would open the storage unit tomorrow after work. She said no, we do it now, and if I refused, she would file a formal complaint with the board and start the fine process tonight. I looked at her and realized she was serious. She wanted to corner me, make me look guilty in front of anyone who was watching, and force me to comply on her timeline. I agreed because I had nothing to hide, and I figured the faster I showed her an empty unit, the faster she would leave. We walked to the storage building behind the clubhouse. It was just after 6 in the evening, and a few neighbors were outside. Stephanie made a point of walking beside me and talking loudly about procedures and compliance, and how the board takes theft very seriously. She said the words theft and stolen at least 3 times before we even got to the building. I unlocked my unit and pulled the door open. It was a 10 by 10 space with a couple of plastic bins, a folding table, and some camping stuff. Stephanie stepped inside and immediately started moving things around. She said she was conducting a visual inspection. I stood in the doorway and watched her pull bins off the shelf and flip lids open. She spent maybe 2 minutes in there, and then she stopped and stared at the back corner. She reached down and pulled out a padded mailer with ripped seams. She held it up and said, "What is this?" I told her I had no idea. She said it was one of the mailers that went missing from the clubhouse office 3 weeks ago, and now it was in my storage unit. I told her I did not put it there. She said that was not her problem. She walked out of the unit holding the mailer and said she was confiscating it as evidence. I asked her if she was serious. She said she was following procedure, and the board would be notified immediately. She also said I was being assessed an emergency fine of $200 for possession of stolen property, and if I did not pay within 5 business days, my access to the clubhouse and pool would be suspended. I told her this was insane. She said I am documenting everything, and pulled out her phone. She took a picture of the mailer, a picture of my storage unit, and a picture of me standing there looking confused. Then she said she was going to email the board tonight and recommend a formal hearing. I asked her if I could see the mailer up close. She said no. It was evidence now and I was not allowed to tamper with it. I went back to my house and immediately started looking through my doorbell camera footage. I have a camera that covers my front porch and part of the driveway, and it keeps a rolling 30-day archive. I went back 3 weeks to the day Stephanie said the mailer went missing. I did not see anything unusual, but I did see something 2 days ago. Stephanie was on my porch at 11 in the morning while I was at work. She was holding a bag and looking around, and then she walked toward the side of my house where the storage building is located. The angle did not show her all the way to the storage building, but the timestamp was clear. I saved the clip and sent it to my phone. Then I called a buddy of mine who does HVAC work in the neighborhood. His name is Greg, and he has had problems with Stephanie before because she kept trying to bill him for vendor access fees that were not in the HOA rules. He told me Stephanie had been stealing small amounts of petty cash from the clubhouse lockbox for months, and the social committee treasurer quit over it because Stephanie kept blaming her for the missing money. Greg said he did not have proof, but he heard it from the treasurer directly. He also said Stephanie had a habit of forcing inspections on people she did not like and always finding something. He told me to get everything in writing and do not trust her to play fair. I thanked him and hung up. The next morning I got an email from Stephanie with the board copied. The subject line said emergency compliance review, and the body of the email said I had been found in possession of stolen HOA property and was being fined $200. The email also said my storage unit was being placed under restricted access pending a board review, and I was required to attend a hearing on the 15th of the month. That was 8 days away. I replied to the email and copied the board. I said I did not steal anything, I had no idea how the mailer got into my unit, and I had security footage showing Stephanie on my property 2 days before the so-called inspection. I attached the doorbell clip. Stephanie replied within 10 minutes. She said the footage proved nothing because it did not show her entering my storage unit, and she was on my property for legitimate HOA business. She did not say what business. One of the board members replied and said they would review everything at the hearing. That was it. No acknowledgement that Stephanie was on my property without permission, no concern about the timing, nothing. I realized the board was not going to help me unless I forced the issue. I printed out a timeline. I used a spreadsheet to list every interaction I had with Stephanie over the past 6 months, every email, every complaint I filed, every notice she sent me. I put it in a manila folder and kept it in my car. I also printed the doorbell clip screenshot showing the timestamp and Stephanie's face. I folded it and kept it in my jacket pocket. 2 days later, I was at the mailbox cluster getting my mail when Stephanie cornered me. She walked up while I was sorting through envelopes and said loudly, "I hope you are ready for the hearing, because I have 3 witnesses who saw you at the clubhouse the day the supplies went missing." I turned around and looked at her. I told her I was not there that day. She said, "That is not what I heard, and I have messages proving it." She waved her phone around again like she was about to show me something, but she did not. A neighbor was standing nearby getting her mail, and Stephanie made sure to speak loud enough for her to hear. She said, "This is what happens when people think they can steal from the community and get away with it." The neighbor looked uncomfortable and walked away. I asked Stephanie to show me the messages. She said they were confidential, and I would see them at the hearing. I walked back to my house and called Greg again. I told him what just happened and asked if he knew anyone else who had problems with Stephanie. He said he would ask around and call me back. An hour later, he called and said a community volunteer named Lisa had dealt with Stephanie over the clubhouse cash box. Lisa used to help with weekend events, and she told Greg the cash box process was sloppy, and Stephanie refused to let anyone audit it. Lisa quit after Stephanie accused her of taking $20 that was never missing in the first place. Greg gave me Lisa's number and I called her. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop the next day. When I got there, she had a folder with her. She said she kept copies of every Cashbox reconciliation sheet she ever filled out, because she knew Stephanie would try to blame her for something eventually. She showed me 3 sheets where the starting balance did not match the prior day's ending balance, and Stephanie had initialed all of them as reviewed. Lisa said Stephanie always did the counts alone and refused to let anyone else verify. She also said Stephanie once told her the clubhouse spare keys went missing, and then a week later Lisa saw Stephanie using those same keys to open the storage closet. Lisa never said anything because she did not want to cause drama, but she always suspected Stephanie was taking things and blaming other people. I asked Lisa if she would be willing to talk to the board or write a statement. She said she would, but she was nervous about retaliation. I told her I understood and thanked her for meeting me. She gave me copies of the reconciliation sheets and wished me luck. That night I put together a binder. I included the timeline, the doorbell footage screenshots, the reconciliation sheets from Lisa, and a printed copy of every email Stephanie sent me. I also included a copy of the HOA bylaws with the sections on fines and due process highlighted. The bylaws said any fine over $100 required a formal hearing with at least 7 days' notice, and the respondent had the right to present evidence and call witnesses. Stephanie's fine notice only gave me 8 days, which was technically compliant, but her email said I was already guilty and the hearing was just a formality. That was not how it was supposed to work. I went to the Clearbrook Village Management office the next morning before work. The office is in a small strip plaza about 2 miles from the neighborhood. I walked in and asked to speak to the property manager. Her name was Angela, and she handled the day-to-day operations for the HOA. I told her I needed to file a formal complaint about Stephanie Kessler. Angela looked uncomfortable. She said she could not get involved in board disputes. I told her this was not a dispute. This was harassment, and I had documentation. I showed her the binder. She flipped through it, and her expression changed. She said she would forward my complaint to the board president and the HOA attorney, but she could not promise anything. I asked her if the management company kept records of clubhouse access. She said they did, but it was managed by the board, and she did not have access to it. I thanked her and left. I was late to work, and my manager gave me a look, but I did not get written up. I spent the rest of the day distracted and checking my email every 10 minutes. Nothing from the board. Nothing from Stephanie. At 4 in the afternoon, I got a text from Greg. He said Stephanie just tried to corner him at a job site and asked him if he had been talking to me. He told her no, and she said she knew he was helping me and she was going to make sure he lost his vendor access. Greg said he was not worried because he had contracts with half the neighborhood, and Stephanie could not actually ban him, but it showed how desperate she was getting. I told him to document everything and keep his texts. He said he already was. 2 days before the hearing, I got another email from Stephanie. The subject line said final notice, and the body of the email said I had not paid the $200 fine, and my access to common areas was now suspended. She said if I showed up at the clubhouse or the pool, I would be considered trespassing, and she would call the police. The email also said she had referred my case to the HOA attorney for collections. I forwarded the email to Angela at the management office and asked if the board had actually voted on any of this. Angela replied an hour later and said she had no record of a board vote authorizing the fine or the access suspension. She said Stephanie was acting on her own authority as vice president, which was not allowed under the bylaws. Angela said she had notified the board president and the attorney, and they were reviewing the matter. That gave me some hope, but the hearing was still 2 days away and I did not know if the board president would actually do anything. I decided to go to the hearing prepared to fight. The hearing was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the clubhouse. I showed up at 6:45 with my binder and my printed evidence. Stephanie was already there setting up. She had a folding table with a stack of papers, a portable printer, and her red folder. She saw me walk in and immediately said, "You are not supposed to be here. Your access is suspended." I told her the management company said the suspension was not valid. She said that was not her problem and I needed to leave. The board president walked in at that moment. His name was Robert, and he looked tired. He told Stephanie to stop and said the hearing would proceed as scheduled. Stephanie said she was enforcing board policy. Robert said there was no board policy authorizing her to suspend access without a vote, and if she did not sit down, he would table the hearing and call an emergency board meeting to address her conduct. Stephanie sat down. Robert asked me to present my case. I opened the binder and walked him through everything. I showed him the timeline of Stephanie's escalating behavior, the doorbell footage showing her on my property 2 days before the inspection, the reconciliation sheets from Lisa showing the cash box discrepancies, and the email where Stephanie admitted she was on my property but refused to say why. I also showed him the bylaw sections on fines and due process. I told him Stephanie violated multiple procedures, falsely accused me of theft, planted evidence in my storage unit, and tried to intimidate witnesses. I said I had done nothing wrong and I wanted the fine reversed, the hearing canceled, and a formal investigation into Stephanie's conduct. Robert looked at Stephanie. He asked her if she had any response. Stephanie opened her red folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She said it was a witness statement from a neighbor who claimed to see me at the clubhouse the day the supplies went missing. Robert asked for the name. Stephanie said the witness wanted to remain anonymous. Robert said that was not acceptable and the statement was inadmissible. Stephanie's face turned red. She said she was protecting the witness from retaliation. Robert said the bylaws required witnesses to be identified and available for cross-examination. He asked Stephanie if she had any other evidence. She said she had the mailer. Robert asked to see it. Stephanie pulled it out of a plastic bag and handed it to him. Robert looked at it and asked where it came from. Stephanie said she found it in my storage unit during a legitimate inspection. I interrupted and said the inspection was not legitimate because Stephanie forced it without board approval and refused to let me review the so-called evidence beforehand. I also said the mailer was planted because my doorbell footage showed Stephanie on my property 2 days before the inspection, and I had no reason to steal a torn mailer that had no value. Robert asked Stephanie if she had any proof the mailer came from the clubhouse. She said it matched the description of missing items. Robert asked if there was an inventory or a serial number or any identifying mark. Stephanie said no, but she knew it was stolen because it was in my unit. Robert said that was circular reasoning and not evidence. He closed the folder and said the hearing was over. He told Stephanie the fine was reversed, the access suspension was void, and he was referring her conduct to the HOA attorney for review. Stephanie stood up and said, "This is unbelievable. I am documenting everything, and you are all going to regret this." Robert told her to sit down or leave. She grabbed her red folder and walked out. Robert turned to me and apologized. He said the board had no idea Stephanie was acting on her own, and they would make sure it did not happen again. I thanked him and asked what the next steps were. He said the attorney would investigate and the board would meet to discuss disciplinary action. He also said I could file a formal complaint with the management company if I wanted additional documentation. I left the clubhouse feeling like I had won, but I knew Stephanie was not going to let it go. I was right. 2 days later, I got a call from a towing company saying they had a request to tow my car from the Clearbrook Village guest parking lot. I told them my car was in my driveway, not the guest lot. The driver said he had a signed authorization from Stephanie Kessler and a photo of a car matching my license plate in the guest lot. I asked him to send me the photo. He did, and it was clearly not my car. The plate was similar but off by 2 digits. I told him it was a mistake and he should not tow anything. He said he would call Stephanie and verify. 10 minutes later, he called back and said Stephanie insisted it was my car and she was filing a complaint with the towing company for refusing to complete the job. The driver said he was not going to tow the wrong car and he was documenting the incident with his company. I called Angela at the management office and told her what happened. She said she would notify the board and the attorney immediately. She also said the towing company had sent her a copy of Stephanie's authorization request, and it included a photo that was clearly not my car. Angela said it looked like Stephanie was trying to harass me by proxy, and it was going to backfire. That night I got an email from the HOA attorney. The subject line said investigation update, and the body of the email said the board had reviewed my complaint and the evidence I provided. The attorney said Stephanie Kessler had violated multiple sections of the bylaws, including improper enforcement actions, unauthorized access to homeowner property, and filing false reports. The email said the board was scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss disciplinary action, and I would be notified of the outcome. 3 days later, I got another email from the attorney. The subject line said resolution, and the email said the board had voted to remove Stephanie from all enforcement duties and require her to communicate with homeowners only in writing going forward. The email also said the board had referred the matter to their insurance carrier due to potential liability exposure, and the carrier had advised the board to implement new oversight procedures immediately. The email said Stephanie was also being required to reimburse the HOA for the cost of the investigation, which included attorney fees and management company time. The total was just over $3,000. The email ended by saying the board apologized for the inconvenience and appreciated my patience during the process. I forwarded the email to Greg and Lisa. Greg called me an hour later and said he heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Stephanie was furious and threatening to sue the board. Lisa texted me and said she was relieved and grateful I pushed back, because she never had the courage to do it herself. I thought that was the end of it, but 2 weeks later I got a call from a deputy with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. He said he was following up on a report filed by Stephanie Kessler, alleging that I had stolen packages from the clubhouse mailroom. I told him I had not stolen anything, and I had evidence proving Stephanie had falsely accused me multiple times. He asked if I could come to the substation and provide a statement. I went that afternoon with my binder and my printed timeline. The deputy reviewed everything and took notes. He said Stephanie's report did not include any evidence, just a claim that she had witnesses. He asked if I had any security footage or documentation showing I did not have access to the mailroom on the dates in question. I pulled out my work calendar and showed him I was in the office on all 3 dates Stephanie listed, and my employer could verify my hours. The deputy said he would contact Stephanie and ask for her evidence. He also said if she could not provide anything credible, he would close the case and note it as unfounded. He told me to keep my documentation and stay calm, because it sounded like Stephanie was escalating out of desperation. 2 days later, the deputy called me back. He said he spoke with Stephanie and she could not provide any evidence. She claimed she had witness statements, but when he asked for names, she said the witnesses were afraid to come forward. The deputy said that was not sufficient to support a criminal complaint, and he was closing the case. He also said he advised Stephanie that filing false reports could result in charges against her, and she should stop contacting him unless she had actual evidence. I thanked him and asked if I could get a copy of the incident report. He said he would email it to me. I forwarded the report to the HOA attorney and Angela at the management office. Angela replied immediately and said the board was holding another emergency meeting to address Stephanie's continued harassment. A week later, I got an email from the board president. The subject line said final resolution, and the email said the board had voted to formally censure Stephanie Kessler and prohibit her from any contact with me or any enforcement activities. The email said Stephanie was being required to communicate with the board and the management company only through written correspondence, and any violation of the contact prohibition would result in removal from the board. The email also said the HOA's insurance carrier had issued a warning about harassment liability, and the board was implementing mandatory training for all board members on proper enforcement procedures. The board president apologized again and said they took the matter seriously. I forwarded the email to Greg and Lisa. Greg called me and said he heard Stephanie tried to rally signatures for a petition to remove the board president, and it backfired because people started asking questions about why she was being censured. Lisa said she heard Stephanie was threatening to quit the board, but no one believed her because she loved the power too much. A month later, I was at the management office paying my quarterly dues when Angela pulled me aside. She said she wanted to give me an update off the record. She said Stephanie had tried to access the clubhouse mailroom logs to prove I had been there on the dates she reported to the sheriff, but the logs showed she was the only person who accessed the mailroom on those dates. Angela said the property management company was reviewing all of Stephanie's access records because there were multiple discrepancies. Angela also said a vendor had filed a complaint with the management company, claiming Stephanie tried to force him to hand over delivery logs without proper authorization. The vendor refused and documented the incident. Angela said the board was now reviewing all of Stephanie's interactions with vendors because there was a pattern of intimidation and overreach. I thanked Angela for the update and asked if there was anything else I needed to do. She said no. The board had everything under control, and I should just keep living my life. She also said if Stephanie contacted me directly, I should document it and report it immediately, because the contact prohibition was in effect and enforceable. 2 weeks later, I was at the mailbox cluster when I saw Stephanie walking toward me. She was carrying a folder in her phone. I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording. She walked up and said, "I know what you did, and you are not going to get away with it." I asked her what she was talking about. She said I had lied to the board and the sheriff, and she had proof. I asked her to show me the proof. She said it was confidential. I told her she was violating the contact prohibition, and I was recording the conversation. She looked at my phone and her face went pale. She said, "You cannot record me without my permission." I told her Florida is a two-party consent state for private conversations, but we were in a public area and there was no expectation of privacy. She turned and walked away. I sent the recording to Angela and the board president immediately. The board president replied within an hour and said the board would meet that week to discuss removal proceedings. He said Stephanie's contact violation was documented and enforceable, and the board had no choice but to act. 3 days later, I got an email from the board president. The subject line said board action, and the email said the board had voted to remove Stephanie Kessler from the board effective immediately. The email said Stephanie had violated the contact prohibition, continued to make false accusations, and demonstrated a pattern of conduct inconsistent with her fiduciary duties. The email said the board had notified Stephanie in writing, and she had been given the option to resign or be removed. She chose to be removed. The email also said the board was implementing new policies to prevent similar issues in the future, including mandatory training, oversight of all enforcement actions, and a formal complaint process for homeowners. The board president apologized one final time and said he hoped I could move forward without further disruption. I forwarded the email to Greg and Lisa. Greg called me and said the neighborhood was buzzing with the news, and multiple people had come forward with their own stories about Stephanie's behavior. Lisa said she felt vindicated and relieved, and she was considering volunteering for the social committee again now that Stephanie was gone. A week later, I was at the management office dropping off some paperwork when Angela asked if I had a minute. She took me into a back office and closed the door. She said the property management company had completed their review of Stephanie's access records, and they found over 30 instances where she accessed the clubhouse, mailroom, or storage areas outside of her authorized duties. Angela said the logs showed Stephanie was in the mailroom on multiple occasions when packages were reported missing, and she was in the storage closet on the day the supplies vanished. Angela said the management company had referred the findings to the HOA attorney, and the attorney was considering whether to file a report with law enforcement. Angela said she could not share more details, but she wanted me to know the investigation had validated everything I reported. She also said a community volunteer had come forward and confirmed the cash box process was sloppy, and Stephanie had refused audits. I asked Angela what happened to the mailer Stephanie claimed I stole. Angela said the mailer had been returned to the clubhouse office, and after reviewing the logs, it became clear the mailer was never missing in the first place. Stephanie had taken it from the office herself and planted it in my storage unit to frame me. Angela said the logs showed Stephanie accessed my storage unit 2 days before the inspection using a master key, which explained the doorbell footage I had captured. I asked Angela if the board was going to take legal action. She said the board was waiting for the attorney's recommendation, but given the evidence and the liability exposure, it was likely they would pursue some kind of resolution. Angela said she could not say more, but she wanted me to know my documentation and persistence had made a difference. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the HOA attorney. He said the board had decided to settle the matter internally rather than involve law enforcement. He said Stephanie had agreed to reimburse the HOA for the cost of the investigation, pay a penalty for her conduct, and sign a non-disparagement agreement. The attorney said Stephanie had also agreed to move out of Clearbrook Village within 90 days. The attorney said the board wanted to avoid the expense and publicity of a lawsuit, and they believed the settlement was in the best interest of the community. He asked if I was satisfied with the outcome. I told him I was, as long as Stephanie was gone and the board implemented the new policies they promised. He said they were already in place, and the board was committed to fair and transparent enforcement going forward. A month later, I saw a moving truck in front of Stephanie's house. I watched from my window as she loaded boxes and furniture. She looked tired and angry, and she did not make eye contact with any of the neighbors. By the end of the day, the truck was gone, and so was she. Greg called me that night and said the neighborhood felt different already. He said people were talking openly about Stephanie's behavior and sharing their own stories, and there was a sense of relief that she was gone. Lisa texted me and said she had signed up to help with the next community event, and she was looking forward to being involved again. I went to the mailbox cluster the next day and ran into Robert, the board president. He shook my hand and thanked me for standing up to Stephanie. He said the board had learned a hard lesson about oversight and accountability, and they were committed to doing better. He also said the management company had praised my documentation and professionalism, and it had made their job much easier. I thanked him and said I just wanted to live in peace and be treated fairly. He said that was exactly what the board wanted too, and he hoped the new policies would prevent anything like this from happening again. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the management company. It was a formal apology on behalf of the HOA, along with a reimbursement check for the time and expense I incurred dealing with Stephanie's false accusations. The letter said the board had voted unanimously to issue the reimbursement as a gesture of goodwill, and they appreciated my patience and cooperation during the investigation. I deposited the check and filed the letter with my other documentation. I kept the binder in my closet just in case, but I did not expect to need it again. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss another HOA drama with receipts and revenge. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm after Stephanie left. The board hired a new vice president who actually followed the rules, and enforcement became consistent and transparent. People stopped whispering about fines and violations, and the community events started feeling like actual community again. Greg told me he landed a contract to upgrade the clubhouse HVAC system, and the new board approved it without any drama. Lisa became the social committee co-chair and organized a neighborhood barbecue that drew over 50 families. I went and spent the afternoon talking to neighbors I had never met, and everyone seemed lighter and more relaxed than they had in months. A few months later, I ran into Angela at the grocery store. She told me the property management company had implemented new training protocols for all HOA board members in their portfolio, and Clearbrook Village was being used as a case study for what not to do. She said the changes were already making a difference in other communities, and she was grateful my case had forced the conversation. I asked her if she ever heard from Stephanie. Angela said no, and as far as she knew, Stephanie had moved to another part of Jacksonville and was no longer involved in any HOA. Angela said she hoped Stephanie learned something from the experience, but she was not optimistic. I did not think about Stephanie much after that. I focused on my job, paid my dues on time, and lived quietly. The HOA left me alone, and I left them alone. It was exactly what I wanted. One afternoon, I was checking my mail when a neighbor I had never spoken to walked up and introduced himself. His name was Tom, and he said he had moved in a few weeks after Stephanie left. He said he heard stories about what happened, and he wanted to thank me for standing up to her. He said he had lived in an HOA before where the board ran wild, and he knew how hard it was to fight back. I told him I just did what I had to do, and I was glad it worked out. He said he hoped the new board stayed on track, because the neighborhood had a lot of potential. I agreed, and we talked for a few minutes about landscaping and street maintenance and other mundane HOA things. It felt normal, and I realized that was all I had ever wanted. That night I pulled out the binder one last time and flipped through it. The timeline, the emails, the doorbell footage, the reconciliation sheets, the incident report. It was all still there, a record of everything that happened. I closed the binder and put it back in the closet. I did not need it anymore, but I kept it anyway, just in case. The HOA was warned by their insurer about harassment exposure and they panicked, and that panic led to real change. Karen was required to communicate only in writing going forward, and when that did not stop her, she was removed entirely. A vendor refusing to cooperate without proper authorization became the leverage I needed, because it showed the board that Stephanie's behavior was not just annoying, it was a liability. The funny karma beat came during the investigation, when Stephanie said she had witnesses, and the witness turned and said actually no. That moment, caught on Angela's notes and confirmed by the deputy, was the beginning of the end for Stephanie. She had built her authority on intimidation and selective enforcement, and when people stopped being afraid, her whole system collapsed. The final humiliation came in the management office lobby. Management handed me the written correction while Karen watched, her face red and her hands shaking as she clutched that red folder one last time. She tried to argue, tried to spin it, tried to claim procedure and authority, but no one was listening anymore. The board president told her to leave, and she did, and that was the last time I saw her in any position of power. The outcome was exactly what I needed. Karen's frame-up collapsed at the management office, the HOA reversed everything in writing, and Karen was barred from enforcement. The settlement and the move were just the final pieces. The proof that accountability had teeth and consequences were real. I learned that documentation is everything, that patience and persistence matter, and that standing up to bullies is hard but necessary. I also learned that most people just want to live in peace, and when someone disrupts that peace for their own power trip, the community will eventually push back. Clearbrook Village is a better place now. The board is functional, the rules are clear, and enforcement is fair. I still live here, still pay my dues, still check my mail at the same cluster. And every time I walk past that mailbox, I remember the day Stephanie tried to corner me there, waving her phone and threatening to ruin me. I remember staying calm, documenting everything, and trusting the process. And I remember winning. I will see you again soon.